Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, Viceroy Verisimilitude, the master of fun and wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, here with the 248th episode of Robservations, a show about something. I can't believe I can even count that high. It's amazing. Well, once again, I am here with you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. You, imagination connoisseurs, and I guess Tallulah and Gilbert are both here, hanging out, walking around, checking things out. They already had cookies. Just because I'm talking, they think they're going to get more. I know, Gilbert, you can't have more cookies. You can only have a few, and that's all you get of your organic cookies. But he knows. He knows. Whenever I'm talking, that I'll get him on the camera. He's not a dumb dog. Tallulah, she's a nice girl. But not as smart as Gilbert. And that is not me making a value judgment. It's just the truth. I think Bernese Mountain Dog and Poodle might be a little bit of a better combination than Irish Setter and Doodle. Look, I'm being caninist. I apologize for that. I did not mean to be that way. Anyway, good show today. Got lots of letters, a lot of stuff to talk about. But first, off the top, something that's been amazing to me is the performance of Joker. Todd Phillips' Joker, I think by any stretch of the imagination, is a resounding, I would dare say, monumental success. Now, in a world where everyone thinks comic book movies have to make $1 billion, well, they don't. It's all about how much does a movie cost, and then also how much does a movie cost to market. Now, before I get into this, I will say Joker did not spend an insubstantial amount on marketing. They spent a very healthy amount. It was a very well marketed film. Everyone knew it was coming out, but the fact that it won the Venice Film Festival, the fact that it was at a film festival at all, they knew they had something special. But reportedly, the movie only cost in the mid-50s, 55 million only, as if that's an insignificant number. But for a studio picture now, it is. And for a comic book related movie, it definitely is not a lot of money, comparatively speaking, what we're used to. And Joker, Gilbert's already barking, and I just started the show. Come on, Gilly, don't bark. But it's amazing how much the movie made. Reportedly, a $55 million spend. Let's say double that with marketing. Let's just say. So we're looking at a $110 million investment by the studio. Now, okay, I know that's not an insubstantial amount of money, but after 10 days in the theaters, let's look at where the Joker is right now, box office-wise. Domestically, we are at $192,728,787. That is through today. That is domestic. Internationally, we're at basically $351,200,000 for a global cum of $543,928,787. Almost $550 million. That is an enormous amount of money. Now, to put that into context, and I know we're talking time, let's look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's look at the first films in each one of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the triptych of Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America, the First Avenger. Iron Man domestically made $318 million domestic. Foreign, it did $266 million for a total of $585 million. Pretty good. But $585 million for Iron Man, the cornerstone of the MCU. That was in its total run. Joker is already at 543. Now, yes, 11 years have gone by. That's true. But still, Thor did 181 million domestic, and foreign it did 268 for a total of 449 million. 449 million. Again, I realize we're talking a decade. And then Captain America, the First Avenger, only made 176 million domestic and 193 foreign for a total of $370 million. Again, 10 years ago. And if you look where those films have come, Captain America Civil War grossed over $1 billion. But this film, and yes, people are going to say, but it's a Batman. It's a Batman film, Rob. It comes from the Batman franchise. It does, but it does not rely heavily on its connections to the Batman franchise. There are connections, admittedly. But what's interesting, I think, about this film is the fact that they took a chance. There was a risk taken here with a franchise property. Todd Phillips came up with a different take. I know Martin Scorsese was originally involved in this project, and that's even more interesting with his comments about the MCU and comic book movies. How does he feel about not only the Joker being a resounding success, a huge success by any metric? Now, I don't think this movie is going to make $1 billion. We talked about that on the John Campea show. I think it'll probably top out worldwide 650 to 700 million, which is, again, a huge number. And it might not get that high, but that's still a huge number for a movie that, lest we not forget, cost $55 million. It is a monster hit, a big success. Well, the question is, okay, now what? What have we learned? I mean, what has Hollywood learned? What has Warner Brothers learned? I think what's really important here, I think the biggest takeaway from this is that franchise properties are malleable. You can do things with them that maybe aren't necessarily what have been done with them in the past. They can be changed. They can be altered. As long as you have, in this case, Todd Phillips, who co-wrote the script, directed the film, you had an auteurist vision here. And the studio, because of the relatively small, I mean, it's so weird to call $55 million relatively small potatoes. But as far as where we're at now with studio filmmaking, it's not that much money. So the studio is risk averse. They were the combination of auteurist vision and not having to spend as much money made this an attractive proposition. Also, as I've said, as we've been saying on the John Campea show, this is a transcendent film in terms of the comic book genre. And when I say comic book, I really mean superhero genre, because if you're talking comic books, all kinds of comic books, you have to go back. Alita Battle Angel was based on a manga. Ghost World was based on a comic. Hell, American Splendor was based on a comic. So is Road to Perdition, based on a comic. Non-superhero comics, of course, but still based on comic book source material. This Joker comes from one of the biggest comic book properties of all, Batman, who has proved to be a box office juggernaut in many different decades. Well, maybe not many, but a few different decades. Audiences have flocked to the Batman decade after decade. In the 60s, they loved Batman. In the 80s, they loved Batman. Well, in the 90s, maybe after seeing Batman and Robin, maybe not so much, but definitely in the aughts, Batman has been around, has been a provable, bankable commodity for a long time. Now, to allow an offshoot of the Batman mythos, Joker being the biggest offshoot probably, to be treated in this manner, to jettison everything that you would expect from a Joker movie, was a risk. But a studio did what a studio should do. You bank on a filmmaker and that filmmaker's vision, meaning you have a solid script, you have a visionary director who does have something that they're going after. Now, Warner Brothers had experience with Todd Phillips. Whether you liked all of the Hangover films, they were, for their amount of money, again, they were not hugely expensive movies, but they delivered. Todd Phillips had a long-time relationship with Warner Brothers, and he delivered the goods. And he gave us something unique, something that people are talking about, truly a zeitgeist moment. I pointed out on Twitter and today on the John Campea show that look, when Saturday Night Live does a digital parody of you with David Harbour playing Oscar the Grouch, you've arrived. I mean, this film has caused a lot of ink to be spilled already. It's definitely a geek, it's an imagination connoisseur flashpoint for discussion. There's a lot of people. It's very funny. I have a lot of people that I deal with on social media that I've been friendly with, and there's a lot of people that are used to a certain kind of comic book movie, and they're seeing that this movie has been heaped with praise. And I don't think that they necessarily really like this movie. It's not the Joker movie that they want, but by not liking it or by publicly coming out and going, it's not what I expected or not what I wanted, I'm seeing people grapple with what does a comic book film that I expected one thing from when it's something else, and clearly the critics like it. How am I supposed to feel about it? So it's doing a good thing. It's making all of us imagination connoisseurs look into ourselves and decide, what is it that we like? What do we want out of our films? And whether you like Joker or not, the best part about it is, well, besides making money, is that it is demanding thoughtful analysis from every corner. Everybody that's watching this film has different takes on it. Some people think, oh, Mediaversity, the Mediaversity website that talks about diversity in media, gave this movie an F. Not to be, I mean, here's what I find really strange about today. This idea that every story that comes out is supposed to appeal to every single person, and it's supposed to be incredibly diverse, and it's supposed to pass the Bechdel test or everything. It's supposed to be, all movies now are supposed to be all things to all people, which is the dumbest, most ridiculous thing that I could imagine. And so the idea that you're judging a movie like The Joker, or Joker, I should say, based on some kind of imaginary diversity quotient that it's supposed to have, or you're judging it by a criteria that you've brought to the film, rather than judge the movie on its own. There's a lot of people that have been, I find the criticism of Joker, when it doesn't necessarily come out as a great advocate of people that are suffering from mental illness, or they're institutionalized, or the healthcare system is not doing its job. Well, I think this film is a criticism of all of those things. It's just maybe not as overt as it's supposed to be. I think we're supposed to glean a lot. This movie presupposes an intelligence on the part of the audience. This is not a film that has been. They have not studio notes. You did not have a bunch of executives all chiming in about what was supposed to happen 15 minutes in, the plot points that the movie needs to hit. That's because it's an auteurist vision. And I think we're all richer for it. We're all richer when we're allowed to see. Sometimes auteurist visions fail. Terrence Malick, for instance, there's movies he's made recently that I've liked very much, such as Tree of Life, and movies he's made that I haven't liked as much. But, his movies, again, are not hugely expensive, so he's able to get away with it. But I think what's really what's good, whether you love Joker or not, I mean, I was very hot and cold, mixed on Joker, but I certainly admired the craft that went into it. I really enjoyed how it was made. The performance, Joaquin Phoenix's performance, it's a tour de force. Whether you like what he did with his Joker, and I would say what he did with his Joker was what the script called for, but he really truly made it his own. I mean, he threw himself with wild abandon into this performance, and it's truly a thing to behold. I mean, he makes you believe. Do I like what they did to the Batman mythos in this movie? Do I like the way I thought it was a very one-dimensional? I mean, now it seems as if every generation we have acceptable villains. I remember watching Lethal Weapon 2 and thinking, oh, because of apartheid and Sun City, everybody from South Africa is now villain, except Patsy Kensit, who wasn't villain. But it's strange. Well, now the 1% are the villains. And maybe they've always been the villains. Who knows? But I understand. They're exploiting the working class. It's always easy to make rich people villains. To me, it's an easy thing, because they have something we all want. They're very easily understood. And of course, they exploited the workers to get whatever they have. So it doesn't matter whether they're nice people or not. They're just bad guys or bad girls, bad people. And Thomas Wayne is portrayed as a bad dude. And in fact, the point that he's having his way with the help and covering it up. So, yeah, he was a bad guy. Did I think that was a little on the nose? The Wall Street guys, the Joker guns down in cold blood. they're bad guys too, simply because of how they were and how they're portrayed. If they were an ethnic minority, the film would have come under fire because of the, I would say, one-dimensional portrayal of. But then again, we've had so many ethnic minorities portrayed as villains in movies. I understand. But be that as it may, criticisms aside, there's something about this movie that people are, I think on one hand, they've never seen a comic book movie that is I would say this adult, that is dealing with, and I, when I say this, there's an irony here, because I think when anybody who's a comic book fan, and I am, I mean, I'm still not quite done, about halfway through Heroes in Crisis, because I sit here and I read this as I work. Here is a story that deals with the main pantheon of DC characters, dealing with, there's a you can go to a, superheroes can have therapy, and the therapist is an AI, but well, I won't get into it. You should read it. It's an interesting story. I can't wait to see where it goes. So when you're reading stories like this, comic book readers take these characters very seriously. I never for 1 minute, when I got back into reading comic books, because I started reading Camelot 3000, because of course, Robbie Cullen had it on my paper route, or I would go back and I started reading Moon Knight, or I started reading the Wolfman Perez Teen Titans, and then that led me into X-Men, and then all through the 80s, Dark Knight and Watchmen, and then John Byrne's Superman run, which led to George Perez's Wonder Woman run, into the goofiness of the 90s, all the Image books, Shadowhawk, you know. I never ever would read comic books and think to myself, well, these are just comic books, so I'll give them a pass. No, you're reading stories about characters, and you're just as into those characters. People who love comic books are just as into the characters in the comic books as whatever movie or TV show they're watching. I know it's hard for people to understand that, but it was true. When I was reading books, and significant books were coming out, whether it was the Wolfman Perez Titans, or whether it was Claremont's X-Men. I mean, I remember whether it was the Mutant Massacre, or I was so into the X-Men storylines. I mean, I was involved. I was wrapped up in it. Crisis on Infinite Earths. Hell, I had to wait like a year for Camelot 3000 number 12 to drop. So you don't, comic book readers don't necessarily, when you're reading comics, you're not putting them in some box saying, well, these don't have to be as good of stories, and the characterizations don't have to be as good. No, you want good stories and good characterizations. And what's really interesting is the people that used to make comic book based movies, they were the ones that were thinking, you know, it's just based on a comic book, so we don't have to necessarily, which is why it took such a long time for something like the MCU to be possible, because even the filmmakers making the movies, as of course evidenced by, I would say, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, there's nothing. I mean, even Tim Burton's first Batman movies, you know, there's a lot of gothic horror in those. There's a lot of animation in those, but it tries to make you believe in its gothic reality, the gothic Gotham that Anton Furst designed. You know, you want to believe in that. They took great pains, whereas Batman Forever and Batman and Robin really don't have a believable world. You can't buy into that. You want to, but you can't. I mean, it's very difficult. And there was no, I know Joel Schumacher was trying to do something different, but he certainly wasn't trying to make us believe that this was a real world. And I think what Joker has done is it's completely shattered. Yeah, there are people talk about, yes, I believe in Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and yes, I believe in Logan. But both Logan and Winter Soldier are very much comic book movies in their conception. They're comic book worlds, and yeah, they're treated realistically. But I mean, you've got shield helicarriers, you've got adamantium skeletons, you've still got Professor X's amazing psychic powers. I mean, this film, what Joker has done is it's stripped away all of the fantastical or the comic bookiness of everything, and it's tried to set this movie firmly in the real world. There is nothing else except reality. And I think that was a really smart choice, and it proves that you can do it. I mean, we've talked about this before, but again, it took a visionary director and a great script, both of which he was responsible for, to do that. What that does to me, what that says, is it opens up an entirely different approach to movies that are based on superhero comics. Now I'm not saying, I don't even know if it's possible to do another character like Joker. A lot of people now are bandying about this idea of a Lex Luthor film with Lex Luthor as President Luthor or something. And I do believe that's possible. You could make a movie about Lex Luthor as President Luthor or head of LexCorp. I mean, how would you deal with that? I think you could strip away again all of the comic bookiness of it all, and tell a story about Luthor as a rising politician and industrialist who decided to move over into politics. I don't know how you could do, like, if you really wanted to do, say, when I say a Joker like retelling of Superman's origins, honestly, I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's possible because inherently Superman is going to have superpowers. He's going to do things like fly. And once somebody flies under their own power, you've broken through a ceiling that Joker could stay underneath, if that makes any sense. I think it would be very, very difficult. See, the thing about this Joker is a lot of people that really love the movie say that, yes, I could see this as a Joker origin story because after he sort of embraces this and stops taking his medication and becomes clear-headed and he can become the mastermind he couldn't be while he was under the thrall of drugs, when he becomes that person, well, then that's when the seed of the Joker that we know and love germinates. And that's when he can become the criminal mastermind that he is destined to be. And I believe in that. But either way, it just more than anything showed the possibilities. And again, why is diversity important? And when I say diversity, I'm not talking about gender or color or any of those things. I'm talking about diversity in storytelling. What this does, what Joker does, is it shows just how diverse fantasy filmmaking can be. And it shows, look, when you're a studio executive and you're throwing around, you're meeting with writers and you're talking about how things are supposed to be, it's because you have these ideas that have been drilled into you about what genres need to become or what they've been in the past and what they need to be successful. What Joker does is blow all that away. Any misconceptions or any preconceptions about what you'd have if you're a studio executive about what a comic book villain should be completely destroyed by Joker. And that is, I think, the greatest thing that happened with this movie. And the importance of that, I think, should not be forgotten. Now, before I get into, I saw some people sending in some chats. I have a letter that was sent to me that deals with this. And I think it's a pretty important, definitely important to read. So first though, let's get into this. Orville Nation says, love your content, Robert. Oh, thank you, Orville Nation. I appreciate that. How excited are we for the third season of The Orville? I think pretty damn excited. I'm very excited. Muckbang Reviews asks if I've seen Cleo from 5 to 7. That's Agnes Varda's movie. I own that movie. I'm a huge fan of thoughts on French shorts or films. I mean, Chris Marker's La Jetée, which was the basis of 12 Monkeys, is a famous French short film that actually, it's a series of stills. It's not even really a film. Well, I mean, it is. Look, I love French movies. I love all kinds of French movies. Everything from modern crime thrillers like Doberman. Is Doberman officially French? Jan Kounen's Doberman. I like Truffaut's movies. I'm a huge French film fan. Amélie is, of course, a movie that I met Elizabeth because of. That's how we bonded together. And I've always loved French cinema. Jean-Pierre Melville is one of my favorite directors. If you haven't seen any of his movies, starting with like Army of Shadows or The Red Circle, or of course his famous Le Samurai, check out. He's made some great crime movies. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of. I'm really just a huge fan of cinema in general. One of the things I was lucky what was lucky for me is I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and Seattle, Washington has one of the greatest and oldest film festivals, the Seattle International Film Festival, that I started going to when I was 12, and it was mostly foreign films. It wasn't you wouldn't see now the most of the films I saw at the Seattle Film Festival were movies I'd never heard of from all over the world. As a matter of fact, there is a Japanese Chinese co-production that was released, I believe, once on VHS, which I have, a movie called The Go Masters, which is a film, I dearly love that I couldn't find. I've been looking for this movie for years, and Joseph Bologna, who subsequently passed away, who co-wrote Tango Shalom, I was at his house in Beverly Hills, and before it was demolished, and he lived in Shirley Temple's old house, and he had a set of foreign films that were released by Columbia Pictures Home Entertainment, and The Go Masters was one of them. And I'm like, oh my God, you have The Go Masters on VHS. I had no idea. He goes, oh, you go ahead and take it. So I did. I took it. But yes, I'm a big fan of French films of all kinds. I'll watch. I like movies from all over the world. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, try not to give away spoilers for El Camino, but did you find the change in appearance of one of the actors to be a little distracting? Yes. There is an actor who plays, I would say, the second largest part in El Camino. Another character from the Breaking Bad TV series being played by an actor who has gained a substantial amount of weight since the end of the Breaking Bad series. Now, I can't even say. I will say that he has recently become a father, and he is involved in real life with an actress that I've admired for a long time. So they probably, from the time they were able to get this movie financed to the time they started it, he probably didn't have enough time at all to start any kind of a workout regimen. But yes, I did find it distracting. It's actually pretty distracting because the weight gain is pretty substantial, but it doesn't bother me. I would rather have him as an actor in the role than not have him there. And if somebody else tried to play his part, I thought it really worked. It is distracting. I'm not going to lie, Willow. It's distracting. But once I got used to it, I'm like, okay. And they really didn't film him in such a way to try and hide it either. I guess they couldn't, but yeah. Jordy Lyon says, thoughts ahead of the Star Wars trailer. Now, anything you want or need to see? Well, Jordy, I guess there is a rumor because one of the agents, our Finn's agent, let it slip that the Star Wars trailer was going to drop tonight during Monday Night Football. I think that was probably mistaken because I look, if they were going to have a Star Wars trailer drop, they're going to make a big deal about it. They're going to make a big deal about it. They just are. So look, as I said, I've got my Star Wars arousal going. I have to say it's I don't need Viagra. I just have my Star Wars arousal. And I look, man, I'm so excited to see The Mandalorian. I'm so excited to see what they do with Rise of Skywalker. You can never surmount the problems. I think you can like Star Wars The Last Jedi, or you can like The Force Awakens all you want. And I don't mean to take that away from you, but for me, at least, there is no story that I've been following because one, I don't understand how the galaxy wound up the way it is between the time of Return of the Jedi and the time of The Force Awakens. It just seems like, oh, well, we're just back to where we were and it's less interesting than it was the first time. So what I would like to see is I just want to have an interesting story. I don't particularly think, as much as I did enjoy Last Jedi, but Last Jedi seemed almost like like an hour-long episode of a TV show. It didn't feel the story that's being told. Again, I like the relationship with Rey and Kylo Ren, and I like the relationship with that Luke. I like what was going on there, and I even liked Rose Tico and Finn going to Canto Bight, but all of it just didn't all work together. It was a souffle that nothing worked well. So by the end of the movie, I'm like, okay, but there is no. I had no questions. I'm like, all right, well, off they go. The galaxy changes and goes on its merry way. So I have no. What I want to see from the trailer is I want an indication of what story are they telling. I don't get a sense that Kylo Ren, I mean, he's ascended up into the ranks of the First Order. I just think one well-placed sniper blast will take him out. I don't find him to be at all formidable. I really don't. All you have to do is get him pissed off and he'll like hit a console on a ship or something. Maybe if you can have him hit the right console, it'll blow him out into the vacuum of space. I don't know. Or maybe he learned how to survive the vacuum of space from his mom. I don't know. I just want to see a good story that I'm excited about. But you know what? It is Star Wars, and I'm excited to see what they come up with. I would like to see new ships. Something cool, something new. Magic K says, yesterday I saw Alien for the first time, and the first time on the big screen. Plot with nowadays POV is kind of cliche, but I still like atmosphere and art designs. Well, look, Alien to me is a perfect movie. And yeah, the movie came out 40 years ago. It was released in I think it came out in, I want to say April, but maybe it came out May 25th. I think it might have come out May 25th. It did come out May 25th, didn't it? Same as Star Wars. I love Alien. I was there. I saw it first run in the theater. It blew my mind. And yeah, it's something that when you go back and you look at something that's 40 years old, you have to go in with the understanding it's 40 years old. I don't think it's fair to go into a movie like Alien and watch it and understand like, oh, okay, the plot, you have to sort of, Alien was ripped off so much after it came out. There was a movie called Creature that I actually saw in theater that was basically Alien. And even Alien, goes back. We talked about it, The Terror from Beyond Space, or Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires, which if you haven't seen is very, very cool. If you want to see a pop art Italian science fiction horror film, so you can't sit there and expect it to blow you away. But the film, talk about verisimilitude. It was mind blowing to see that there was nothing like Alien. Nothing. Plot wise, maybe a little. Even the Quatermass movies have a little Alien in them. But man, that movie, from the art direction to the cinematography in the film, my God, it is an incredible motion picture. The art direction, everything about it. But I'm glad you got to see it in a big theater, because seeing Alien in a big theater is a big deal. There's no other movie like it. JB Bonifacio says, El Camino reminded me of Toy Story 4, unnecessary but well made. In either case, both are instances of how to take creative risks with franchises. Listen, I'm going to tell you, Elizabeth did not like El Camino very much. I really liked it. It's funny. You go into these things and everybody, I think, expects movies to sort of change their lives. When we go into them, it's like, this movie is going to be so great. I don't know. I don't even know what so great means anymore. Because I think about some of my favorite movies of all time. Movies that, like, I love Michael Mann's Thief. James Caan. It's Michael Mann's first theatrical feature. James Caan plays a diamond thief who gets involved with the Chicago mob. And, it's a small story, but it isn't small if you look at the stakes for the James Caan character. Robert Prosky is one of the great crime boss villains ever, and I believe it was his first acting role. I love that film. It's a small movie. I've told people to watch it. I'm like, I love this movie so much. The first 9 minutes is this talk about verisimilitude, this incredibly realistic diamond heist. It's like textbook. If you want to rip off a safe, steal diamonds. I love Thief, and I've told people to watch it. I've told people that it's one of my favorite, if not, it's right up there in my top 5 crime thrillers of all time. But it's not. It doesn't have a lot of gunplay in it. It's a character study. It's a character study of of a man, a loner who wants to live his life on his own terms after getting out of the joint. And it's incredibly realistic. And Michael Mann used real detectives and real criminals and even cast them in opposite roles in the movie. Sometimes criminals are playing cops in the film. Cops are playing criminals, and it just has an authenticity. It drips verisimilitude. I dearly love the film. And when I tell people, I'm like, this is one of my favorite movies. It came out in 1981. People are like, well, it was okay. I understand that, but I felt El Camino, as far as learning how Jesse's story ended, I really liked it. I thought it was really good. Elizabeth thought it was slow moving, and to me, it felt like a late 70s or early 80s crime thriller. It is a movie that does not stand alone. You know, my only criticism of it would be it doesn't stand alone. If you haven't seen Breaking Bad, it would be incomprehensible to you. None of it would mean anything. I mean, you could still follow it and get it, but it wouldn't really mean much. And I really enjoyed El Camino a great deal. I thought it was definitely worthy of Breaking Bad. I mean, what if it was what if that had been made as a two-part episode, and then you had the final two-part episode of Breaking Bad? People would have loved it. But I think people expected, nowadays everybody's expecting something more, maybe. I didn't. I thought it was wonderful. I loved where it went. I love what happened. I love Breaking Bad. I thought it was beautifully, the widescreen photography was great. There was a lot of tension. There's a lot of scenes, a couple scenes in particular. I'm like, whoa. I really liked it a lot. Really enjoyed it. And I definitely thought it was worthy. But JB, you say that it's unnecessary, but well made. You know, it is unnecessary. But again, you had Vince Gilligan, the creator of the show, coming back and doing it. He wrote and directed it, an auteurist vision. I really got something out of it. And I did think that it was definitely a worthy successor to Breaking Bad, and I enjoyed it. I really did. Mukbang Review says, what did you like about In the Tall Grass? I have not seen it yet. I've not watched In the Tall Grass. It was very well filmed. Script was good, while the settings were simple. That's why I love it. I mean, I love the idea behind it. I hadn't read the novella when I heard about it. Vincent Natali, who directed, the great thing to me, what made me most interested in seeing it, is Vincent Natali, who made Cube. If you guys haven't seen, now Cube's a franchise, but when I first saw Cube in 1998 at the Sitges Film Festival, I loved it. I was like, my God, what a brilliant idea for a movie. It's basically one set that they just relight the walls different colors when they go from one room into the other. I love Cube. If you haven't seen Cube, Cube is one of, I think, the finest examples of making a really intriguing science fiction / horror film on a low budget and really maximizing your dollars when you have it doesn't have a very good ending. The ending is not satisfying, but it's a great little movie. And Vincent Natali, who directed Cube, directed In the Tall Grass. So I'm a fan of his. Sometimes he lets me down, but for the most part, I can't wait to see it. That's the next thing on my list. Speaking of Netflix movies, Marianne. You got to watch Marianne if you haven't seen Marianne. Now, Marianne, it's goofy. I'll tell you that it's a little goofy, but it's got some of the best scares. It's got some truly disturbing, horrific stuff in it, but it's pretty good. And watch it in the original French, by the way. The Richard is here. The Richard, how are you, man? Aloha, Rob. How is everything looking for Bond 25 in London? Should we start planning? Maybe we could have someone to help organize and look for things to do. The Richard is speaking about my desire to go see Bond 25 at the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square. Now, they are on target for it's going to open on the 3rd of April in London, on the 8th here in the States. I want to go see it. I went and saw Skyfall. Skyfall opened 2 weeks early in the UK than it did here. And back in 2012, I went to see Skyfall in London. And I want to do the same thing because it's the 25th official James Bond movie. So yeah, I've been talking about doing this excursion. I think we should absolutely plan. The only thing is we have to find out if there's going to be a preview night screening on the 2nd, or if it's actually going to start playing the 2nd. I'm not up on how British cinema works now in terms of, we have Thursday night screenings here in LA, and a lot of theaters do, and usually they're Thursday night screenings. Thursday night, 6, 7, 8, whatever. We have to find out if they're doing that because we got to go to the first show. The whole point is to go with a great British audience to watch a movie about a great British hero. And I believe that is a Thursday. The second is a Thursday. The third is Friday. And then I would plan on staying the weekend and hanging out in London. So we should definitely start planning that, the Richard. Definitely think that is something we can do. I'm looking forward to that. The thing that stressed me out about Skyfall was being able to get the tickets, which I was able to do because when it was 4:00 here, it was midnight there and the tickets went on sale and I was able to get tickets. So, yeah. So, we'll see. I don't know. Alan Sachs says, compare Edward from Discovery to Barclay from TNG. Oh gosh. Okay, Edward is the character that he stars in the new Short Trek episode, The Trouble with Edward. And I hated it. I really hated it. And again, they did to the Tribbles what what Prometheus and Alien Covenant did to the alien xenomorph, which is completely demystify them. And of course, it's human beings that mucked around with the Tribbles to turn them into what they are, which to me completely defeats the purpose. But since Alan has asked, I think the characters, I'll tell you what, Edward was not endearing, whereas Reginald Barclay was endearing. And I think what's really interesting to compare and contrast those characters, even though Barclay obviously was on the spectrum or had some kind of, he had a lot of different mental difficulties or mental roadblocks he threw up for himself. I thought Edward was more kind of an unlikable character. And I don't know if the people that write Discovery, and Michael Chabon wrote this episode. Oh no, maybe he didn't write this episode. He wrote Q&A. But I just felt that the writing staff really just let everyone down. I mean, that character was not a likable character. And to me, that shows the difference between the two shows. I mean, what Barclay did in TNG was really creepy. I mean, he was creating his own fantasy life with crew members on the holodeck, and it was a little weird. But we all have fantasy life, so we understand. But the way he was treated with a lot of understanding, and look at, I mean, without getting into it, look at the fate of those two characters. I really can't stand Star Trek Discovery. I hate ultimately the messaging of that show. Hey, Starfleet, there's a lot of people that are just disposable. I don't like them. Let's portray them a certain way. And you know what? If they die, your captain, does she really, am I going to miss him? No, maybe not. So I would say that the real difference is that Barclay were written by empathetic people that really understood what Star Trek was all about, whereas the character of Edward was written as a despicable character, I think, from the outset, maybe not totally despicable, and was then sacrificed by a writing staff that isn't nearly as creative or clever as they think they are. But yeah, I was going to do a review of that episode, and I'm just like, oh. Jet Screamer says, Pandemonium here on YouTube. Scary funny. Is there Pandemonium on YouTube? I am unaware of the Pandemonium. I don't know. Sometimes I miss out. Have I missed something? Anyway, James Walls, my new buddy James Walls, wrote in a letter that I quite enjoy that goes into the subject matter that I was talking about earlier. Again, this is James Walls. James says, I believe the other day the subject of franchises being rebooted and risk-averse came up. While talking on the phone with my dad, we were talking about his recent trip to Disney World with my mom, and I inquired if they rode the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, due to it was my favorite ride. They couldn't due to long lines, but with his answer broached the Twilight Zone series. The week before, I watched for the first time the pilot of the seminal series on Netflix, followed by it's Where Is Everybody, right? Was that the pilot or was that the first episode? The week before, I watched for the first time, the pilot of the seminal series on Netflix, followed by the episode with Robert Redford as Death and the first episode with Shatner. He then said he and my mom were talking about an episode with Elizabeth Montgomery. Usually, while on the phone with my dad, he'll ask if my computer is on and to look up something. So I decided to beat him to the punch, and I looked up the episode, and I mentioned "To," the episode name. To make a long story short, he made a mistake and meant an episode starring Anne Francis. Was that the After Hours? That premiered during the 4th season. Well, now I was curious and I didn't want to spend $4 on Amazon Prime since season 4 isn't available on Netflix. So I looked up season 3, episode 1, "To," starring, yes, Charles Bronson and Elizabeth Montgomery, years before fame and stardom caught up to them. Elizabeth Montgomery was, of course, on Bewitched, and Charles Bronson was in many different things, but, things like Great Escape and the Death Wish movies. While viewing the episode, two things sprung to mind. One, it's almost a silent film. The characters really don't talk to one another. In fact, the only line Montgomery has is "pretty" in Russian. Bronson does most of the talking. Two, it's an anti-war episode way before Vietnam started for the U.S. The episode takes place in a future after war has devastated the earth. Bronson and Montgomery's characters are on opposite sides, and they don't speak the same language. Both are exploring what's left of a city, trying to normalize themselves, but the instinct to kill each other still kicks in, more on Montgomery's behalf than Bronson. He shows her respect, and eventually she wants to spend time with him. After a couple of near communications and confrontations, they decide just to hang out with each other. It's a really beautiful episode because Bronson laments he's just tired of fighting, and even though these two characters are extremely different, they both find a commonality that brings them together. This is what brings me to reboots, franchises, risk-averse, etc. Probably what has ruined the networks and studios is now they are part of massive umbrella conglomerates. In fact, Viacom and soon-to-be Viacom CBS is in trouble with the Paramount flop Gemini Man. Give them credit for making the film, which was original, but the concept really didn't fire up audience interest, and they spent too much money due to the star power of Will Smith. Studios need to get it in their heads that concept is the selling point now. The star power is the bonus or reference. Paramount is in such trouble that Top Gun Maverick, which might be a surefire hit, is co-funded by a Chinese company, even though it stars Tom Cruise. Yet Paramount still partners with Skydance, Tencent Pictures, when 33 years ago, Paramount solely funded Top Gun. Networks and studios solely funded Top Gun. Networks and studios care about the bottom line. Creativity is second nature. It's what gets the viewers and butts in seats. Do I blame them? Well, yes and no. Without risk, what's the damn point? But to them, risk is now something different and doesn't deal with storytelling anymore. Think about it. The story that was described for that Twilight Zone episode could have been told today. Yet it was told in 1961, 58 years ago. You have a woman soldier. By the way, I believe October 3rd was, in fact, the 60th anniversary of the Twilight Zone's debut back in 1959. You have a woman soldier who speaks Russian back then, a Cold War era story. Now the studios would turn that into a selling point. In present day, every other film or show acts like they are taking a risk in their casting choices to bring them positive attention for taking risks. Whether it's a person of color or gender, forgetting that they've been beat time and time again in decades past. Charlton Heston has an interracial romance in The Omega Man, which was in 1971. Back then, that was a risk. Tom Cruise has an interracial romance in Mission Impossible 2, 29 years later. I don't recall during that year it being a big deal at all. Whereas now it seems like Hollywood pat themselves on the back if they do such a pairing. Back in 1961, it was close to unheard of to have Montgomery, Samantha from Bewitched, as a Russian soldier fighting in a future war. Yet now it probably would be portrayed as fresh by the studios due to wanting to seem like they are taking a risk, when in reality they aren't. Star Trek Discovery, or the producers, made a big deal about an African-American female lead, yet they were beaten to the punch in the 1990s by both Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Inclusivity is great. However, when the focus is on gender or race more than the actor and their talent, it could overshadow them as a person, which is wrong. Risk in casting is one thing, but risk in storytelling is something that needs to keep happening in order for content to stay relevant and touch the human need. Again, that Twilight Zone episode is simple. It talks about people just wanting to connect. We live in an era where it is essentially easier to connect now than it was back in 1961, but sometimes it feels like we aren't maybe adhering to the tools to communicate rather than to our own voices or personal presence. The only real risk I can think of that studios took in 2019 that is paying off in spades is Joker. Todd Phillips was smart enough to figure out how to make a film about a deranged man and make it somehow accessible and something audiences wanted to see. Now Warner Brothers looks smart for going with it. Not sure if the new Twilight Zone will remake this episode, but if they do, like everything else with that new series, they'll probably miss the point. A good story that resonates is timeless. One that is flashy for the sake of PR is forgetful. Well, James, a great letter. I mean, look, I'm with you 100%. I was watching a conservative pundit who I was not very familiar with. And that conservative pundit, basically, there's a lot of people that think they call him far right, ultra conservative. I wasn't familiar with him. He's got a new book out that he's promoting. And let me, you know what? Let's see. Let's see. I'll find out his name. Yes. Okay. So the book that I was watching him promote is called The Strange Death of Europe, and it's by a conservative pundit named Douglas Murray. Now, I was not familiar with Douglas Murray. He also has a new book out called The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race, and Identity. Hot button topics, to be sure. But one of the things that impressed me was at the end of his book deals with The Strange Death of Europe, deals with all this immigration. And basically, he made a really good point that I thought was interesting. Basically, first of all, everyone knows our world isn't perfect, and we need people. Marginalized voices have not had voices before. But his point was, he said, for everything that everybody's saying now, our society, human society, is better than it's ever been. I mean, sure, do we have our problems? Yes. But our culture, in terms of our technology, our accessibility to information, has never been better. And yet, we're so quick to want to give away what we have and what has been established, this march toward evolution. And one of the things that Douglas Murray, the point that he was making that is very divisive, especially in Europe with Brexit votes and things like that, basically, Douglas Murray was saying, look, and he's British. He's saying, don't we want to retain our Britishness? Like our British society that is the product of literally hundreds and hundreds of years of evolution to get us where we are, the rights of the individual, our system of laws, that what happens is, and his point about immigration, now I'm not saying he's correct, but he's saying that when people want to immigrate, he even says immigration is a good thing. But what you want is you want immigration. You want people that are coming into your country to learn the ways of that country, to become active, vibrant, and participatory citizens in the lands that they come to, not to expect the lands to change in order to accommodate the interests of the immigrants. That's basically what he was saying. But in the end, he said, what we have going on here, while not perfect, is great. It's great, and it's always evolving and getting better. And all of these things, as was just pointed out, the stories that we were telling, there was a lot of really smart storytelling going on because people were educated. They were educated in the classics. There was the canonical. Now we would rather tear down an author like Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. Oh, you can't teach Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer because of the use of the N-word or other things that are now deemed offensive. Well, you know what? A smart population can go back and say those books are written almost 150 years ago, or things were different, and what we should be able to do is look at literature that has problematic elements But look at it holistically. What is Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn? What are those books about? What are the messages of those books? To Kill a Mockingbird is not going to be taught anymore. I mean, what we're doing is we are allowing the elements of these things to overshadow the essence of these things. And I think that's going on all across society. Elements are just because you hire a woman or hire a person of color does not mean that the stories that you are telling are benefiting from diversity. I've talked a lot about the culture. I think that we have a very superficial. We're now in a very superficial time when we're looking at people get their head in they get a head full of steam talking about, well, well, I don't want to watch these old shows because they're all about the white patriarchy or whatever, whatever you want to call it. Well, okay, but are you going to then discount all of history? We are in an evolutionary period of time always. We're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving. And again, what we are doing is we are getting now caught up in the superficial elements of things rather than the overall essence of them. And that's bad. That's bad. I mean, the thing about Deep Space Nine, which is so amazing, and I've said this to many, many people, is it had one of the great portrayals of a single black father. How often do you see single black fathers portrayed in media at all? Much less Star Trek. The relationship that Benjamin Sisko had with his son Jake was an incredible, that was representation. They did do an episode, Far Beyond the Stars, that tackled racism head on, but race was never, no one said, this is going to be a very diverse show. They just did it. It just happened. I mean, the big thing with Avery Brooks was always about his character and his performance. And when he shaved his head and grew a goatee, they were talking about not the fact he was black, but the fact that his goatee made him a badass. His bald head and his goatee turned him more into like Hawk from Spencer for Hire. I mean, that was what was important. They didn't make a big deal that Avery Brooks was black because it was self-evident. The elements weren't important. The essence was. And I think that, what we're learning, I mean, you go back and you look at most of the Twilight Zone episodes, look, they're not all great, but they're very sophisticated. They're very sophisticated. The Twilight Zone is very sophisticated storytelling. And that's why now what's so funny is all the twist endings and the famous stories have been parodied so many times on whether it's The Simpsons or whatever. That to go back when you actually watch the original Twilight Zone, which, by the way, when I was a little kid, the Twilight Zone and Star Trek were neck and neck for my favorite things. I got different things out of them. But if you haven't watched the original Twilight Zone, you haven't seen some of the greatest storytelling ever in the television medium. And what's really unfortunate, the new Twilight Zone got all caught up in the elements. They were more interested in the elements and not the essence. And I thought the new Twilight Zone was an abomination, a travesty. And much like Star Trek Discovery, because the wrong things are being concentrated on. And it's very, very frustrating. Dan V900 says, Variety is reporting that Zoe Kravitz has been cast as Catwoman. I like the casting. With Paramount, Terminator Dark Fate will flop with that budget. I really like Zoe Kravitz a lot, and I think she'll make a great Catwoman. I mean, I'm sure there's already people screaming about it, but I'm like, hello, Eartha Kitt in the 60s Batman. So, and of course, well, it's not going to be Halle Berry's Catwoman. I think it'll be great. I love Zoe Kravitz a lot, and hopefully they'll see something. We'll see something good in that. I mean, again, the Batman movie, I don't want to get caught up with the elements. I want to see what the essence of it is. I have no sense of what the movie's going to be, what it's about, and I want it to be great. Dan brings up something really interesting. We've been talking about, I look at, I keep saying, with Terminator Dark Fate and Gemini Man, these were two movies that on paper probably looked good. Again, I love my new phrase. They're looking at the elements, but not at the essence. The Gemini Man script let it down. Interesting premise, but there's nothing that really sets it apart. There's nothing that really took it to the next level. I want Terminator Dark Fate to be great. I really like Tim Miller. He's a total, as John Schnepp would say, is sweaty. I've met him personally. John Schnepp and I actually had a very nice conversation with him after we saw the first Deadpool at IMAX headquarters. I really like the man. I want him to succeed. But I look at this Terminator movie, and there's nothing intellectually in it, at least from the trailers, that make it at all interesting. Okay, there is a Terminator trying to kill a young woman that presumably has some kind of tie to the future, but it's no longer Skynet. It's something now called Legion because the future was changed in Judgment Day. Okay, but aside from a gimmicky Terminator hunting down our heroes, maybe that's all the Terminator franchise is about. But what does it have to say that's anything new or interesting? And I'm getting none of that. Why should I go see this movie where I can just go back and watch the original Terminator, which I still think is one of the great low-budget sci-fi thrillers ever made, or Terminator 2, which is also one of the great action movies ever made? I haven't seen anything that intellectually stimulates me enough to want to go. And I think that's problematic. Rick Berg says, risk is our business. That's what the Starship's all about. That's why we're aboard her. Yes, risk is our business from Return to Tomorrow. That's the episode with Sargon. I love that episode, by the way. And what a great speech. I ripped it off. I had Eric McCormack do a riff on that in Free Enterprise because it's one of my favorite Star Trek speeches ever. Let's see. I got lots of letters, man. A lot of letters. But you know what? I think it's time for a Willow Yang letter. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Willow Yang in the house. This is a great letter, by the way. We now know that Willow Yang, beginning her Star Trek education, she has passed through the original series and the animated series, and now she's in the 3rd season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Maybe she's beyond it. Well, she has to be beyond it now because it was best of both worlds. But she wrote another review of one of my favorite episodes from the 3rd season. I think one of the best episodes of Next Generation that people don't talk about a lot. But I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm just going to turn the floor over to Willow Yang. Greetings, Rob. I'm writing my thoughts on Next Generation's The Defector. The episode has resonated with me, both for its dramatic tension and suspense, and also for its nuanced and sympathetic depiction of those on the opposite sides of the battlefield. On one hand, The Defector played out as a compelling spy thriller, filled with tension, intrigue, and espionage. The stakes are high. The fate of both the Federation and the Romulan Empire hang in the balance. And at the center of it all is the enigmatic Romulan Jarok, whom the title of the episode refers to. The story does a fine job of concealing his character's true motives. There were just enough clues scattered throughout that left his intentions ambiguous. Was he telling the truth? Or was he a spy sent to provide Picard with false information? Why didn't the pursuing Romulans destroy his ship when they had the opportunity? What was that orange chip that he took out while he was alone in his chamber? Something would happen that makes me think one way about Jarek, and then another thing happens that makes me think the other. It wasn't until the end, when the ploy of the Romulans was revealed, did it all make sense. Another thing that I appreciated about The Defector were the callbacks that it made to the previous episode, The Enemy, another Romulan-centric story that explored the necessity for tolerance and enmity between two opposing groups. I thought the latter episode made quite a bold move in having Worf choosing not to save the injured Romulan. I will, of course, disregard the scientific flaws behind the notion of a ribosome transfusion. And I like that his decision was not forgotten in The Defector. Worf's lingering racial animosity can make for some interesting exploration and character development that I do hope will be carried out in subsequent episodes. Well, you'll see, won't you? I additionally quite enjoyed the reappearance of the smarmy Tomalak, whose verbal sparring with Picard is a real treat to watch. Played by Andreas Katsoulas from Babylon 5, he played Jakar. The original series Balance of Terror depicted the parallels between those on the Enterprise and those on the Romulan ship and how much alike the two disparate sides actually are. And I really liked how The Defector builds on this theme. Even though the stories are usually told from the perspective of the Federation, whom we are supposed to accept as noble and good, sometimes our views are challenged. We have seen in episodes like the Enterprise incident that the Federation is not above utilizing deceptive tactics against their foes, making up lies that weren't too dissimilar from the stories that Tomalak concocted in The Enemy. At the beginning of The Defector, the crew of the Enterprise expresses their intent of probing Jarek's ship to gain insight into Romulan technology, only to have their plan foiled by Jarek setting off the auto-destruct sequence. At the end, Tomalak expresses the same intent with the Enterprise, only to have his plan foiled by the appearance of the cloaked Klingon warships. How much better are we really during times of conflict? How frequently have we resorted to ignoble, if not downright reprehensible tactics against our enemies? It is all, as Jarek suggested, just a matter of perspective? A massacre in the eyes of one group is viewed as a campaign in those of the opposition. One world's butcher is another world's hero. Sometimes it is the personal stories that are the most outstanding in Star Trek. Although the political intrigue and suspense of The Defector made for a very compelling narrative, what really got to me in the episode is its humanization of Jarek, a Romulan whom by all records is as deceitful, ruthless, and cruel as his race might be stereotyped to be, but is nevertheless presented as a sympathetic and even noble character, a father who wanted to change the world for his daughter. I saw his tale as a tragedy, a warning about the futility and destructiveness of warfare and hatred. My favorite scene in the episode is the conversation between him and Picard, during which the latter forces the former to accept that he is now a traitor. It is in that scene that I was able to really empathize with the person that was behind the enemy line. Picard has no children, and Jarek observes that he has sacrificed too much for his career. Yet it is Jarek that appears to have sacrificed too much for his family, willingly discarding all that he's had to ensure peace between the two parties. His story struck a chord with me. Perhaps I'm just jaded. I'm very much a curmudgeon when it comes to romances. I tend to roll my eyes at sappy movies like The Notebook. What really touches me often isn't romantic love, but the love between family and friends. The love that Jarek has for his child is so unshakable and unconditional, he is willing to leave her to never see her again, to have her grow up resenting him and believing him to be a traitor, because at least she will grow up. Familial love, the sacrifices that parents are willing to make for their children, is just such a universal theme that I think anyone, regardless of their culture, upbringing, or species, can relate to. The conclusion of The Defector is quite a gut punch to me. Jarek comes to the realization that he's been used as a pawn by his own government, that his sacrifices were all for naught. He commits suicide, but not without leaving a letter behind for his family, indicating his hopes that someday the Federation and the Romulans would be able to find peace. We are shown the suffering, the callous treatment of an individual by their warring government through the lens of someone belonging to a group that normally serves as the antagonist in the Star Trek universe. But behind every soldier on the opposite of the battlefield is still a person who loves and is loved, and who is really not so different from us. And perhaps, if we can learn to remember that, our world would be made for the better. Live long and prosper, Willow. Another fantastic letter. If you like Willow's letters, go to the website, theburnetwork.net, and look up Willow Talk for more of her very cogent, very delightful analysis of Star Trek, which I am loving. And I live for getting more of those in. Yeah, I think she nailed it. I think Willow nailed it right there. And again, that's what great science fiction does. You know, it sheds a light. It becomes illuminating for us, even though it's taking place in the 24th century. The Romulans, they have a big part to play, both now and especially in Deep Space Nine. Yeah. I'm glad you liked the episode. I thought it was terrific. I really, really liked The Defector. I think it's one of the great episodes of the third season. I can't wait to hear what you think of the rest of the third season. Mukbang Review says, you are a walking library encyclopedia. Talk Risky Business or Tom Cruise movies if you could. Well, Risky Business, which came out in 1983. Risky Business is my favorite teen comedy of all time. I think it's smart. I think it's sophisticated. I think it deals with sex in a pretty adult manner for a teen movie. and I think it has a lot to say. It's unbelievably stylishly made. Tangerine Dream score is incredible. I really like the friendships in the movie, and the script. Again, the script is so smart. And it's a tremendous movie. I don't think it's aged at all, really, aside from the fact that there's no cell phones or anything in the film. I think its sophistication keeps it as relevant now as it was when it came out. Even for all of its stylization, I felt that it was real. I believed Risky Business. I don't believe many teen movies nowadays. I love teen films. I love watching them. Recent teen movies I really liked. I loved Easy A. Is Easy A does it have a lot of verisimilitude? No, maybe not. But I really liked Easy A. I really liked Election. But Risky Business to me is the pinnacle of great 80s teen films. It's a very smart, it's just a great movie. I really, 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 really like it a lot. Yeah, I think it's great. Tom Cruise movies. I'm a huge fan of Tom Cruise. I think, I actually got to meet Tom Cruise, and he and I had a one-on-one conversation while we were waiting for people to show up to a screening of Valkyrie. He actually wasn't told they changed the time. So I was there with my friend Sean, who's no longer with us, and my girlfriend at the time, Mary Forrest, and we were waiting for him to show up, and he showed up. Him and Suri and Katie Holmes showed up, and it was just, we're waiting in the screening room at Laser Pacific here in town. And I figured, he's like, hey, who are you guys? And I said, well, we're friends of Bryan Singer's. I've been working for Bryan for a long time. I wasn't working on Valkyrie. And this was specifically a screening, which I did not know at the time, to show Valkyrie to Will Smith. And Will Smith came to that screening, and there wasn't a lot of people there. But so we were just sitting there waiting, and I figured, why not talk to Tom Cruise? And I said to him, I go, hey, man, I'm a huge fan of yours. And I just wonder, you've made so many great choices with both the directors that you choose to work with and then the material. And I asked him, I said, what do you lean towards more? Do you lean toward your potential collaborators and your directors, or do you lean towards the scripts? And he looked at me and he was like, wow. And then I started asking him specific questions about his career, just extemporaneously off the top of my head. And he was really taken aback, to be honest, at first, because I had no agenda. I just figured he's here, and he was we were off to the races. And that first question I asked him, he goes, nobody's asked me that, but I think that's a really great question. And he says, it's both. He said it was a combination of the filmmaker and it was a combination of the project. Those things, and obviously he's always looking for good projects and good people, but then we talked about his whole career, and what I got from Tom Cruise is, look, when you're a mega celebrity like that, you have to be very protective of yourself and your family and your reputation and who you are, because nobody understands what it's like to be that kind of a mega celebrity. You can't go into 7-Eleven and buy a tube of toothpaste if you want it. But what he really was totally engaged, and we talked for 45 minutes or an hour to an hour before anybody else showed up. And he just was really smart, really interesting, and he appreciated me being able to just talk off the top of my head about his movies. And I talked to him about Legend, what that was like. And it was funny because that was the only thing he was like, I don't know if I would do that movie again. But he did have a lot of praise for Ridley Scott. And again, we talked about, I didn't ask him about Top Gun so much as I really wanted to know about things like Jerry Maguire, working with Cameron Crowe, working with Rob Reiner on A Few Good Men, and all of those things. And I have the utmost respect for him. He's a guy that became a megastar. He cares about his coworkers, and he's all about the work. And I read once, and I did not talk to him at all about Scientology or anything, but I read once that remember, Scientology was basically an outgrowth of L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics. The science fiction writer was basically creating a religion, I understand. And L. Ron Hubbard, who created Scientology, was a golden age science fiction writer, for the 40s. And he created Dianetics. And Tom Cruise, I believe, from what I understand, he was dyslexic. And by applying what he had learned, what he'd read in Dianetics, he was able to deal with his dyslexia. So for him, it became a practical thing. He's like, well, there's something here. So I don't think that he was indoctrinated by the crazy. I mean, he was the least crazy person I've met. Now, a lot of it, yes, he does have an act that he puts on where he deals with the public. That was very apparent. But as the more I talked to him, and the more he realizes I was asking him thoughtful questions about his career, he opened up to me. He's like, "Oh, I had no agenda other than I wanted to see the final version of Valkyrie, which I'd watched developing in the edit bay while Bryan Singer and John Ottman had been crafting it. I'd seen many different versions of it, so I wanted to see this version, which was basically the finished version." But he realized I had no agenda, and I wasn't telling him what a great fan I was. I was asking him, because remember, everybody has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And I just asked him questions about his career, and clearly I was a fan. And we did talk about, I did tell him that I think that they should make a sequel to Risky Business now that he's made a sequel to Top Gun. He was like, "No, why would you make a sequel to Top Gun?" I mean, they were talking about it, but I said, "You need to make a movie called Riskier Business, where Joel Goodson now has become one of America's great entrepreneurs and now deals with his children today." You know, something like that. He liked that idea. So that's my story about Tom Cruise movies. I mean, look, I'm a fan of. I like A Few Good Men. I love Jerry Maguire, and I do like Vanilla Sky, but I liked American Made. I thought that was good. I mean, I enjoy Tom Cruise as a presence. I thought he was incredible in Magnolia. I didn't like that movie very much. His Les Grossman was amazing. He throws himself into any role. I really liked him in Color of Money. I love his performance in Color of Money with Paul Newman. I think that was great, and that led to a friendship, a lifelong friendship for at least the rest of Paul Newman's life. I mean, I really enjoyed him. I've enjoyed Tom Cruise for his whole career. So yeah. Alexander Wilson says, the best fictional depiction of a single black father was Will Smith's performance as Chris Garner in The Pursuit of Happiness. That was a tearjerker. I agree. That was a great performance. That is a great portrayal. But I mean, on television, as far as Star Trek goes, and also just on TV in general, you had 7 seasons of a very thoughtful, emotional relationship between Jake and Ben Sisko. And of course, I mean, me being a white dude, I can't really comment on that, but it seemed to me like it was a good portrayal. But Alexander, I will take your word on that. But you know what? I like The Pursuit of Happiness. I think it's a very good film, and it doesn't always get the credit it deserves. Critical Equation says David Benioff wrote Gemini Man. Makes sense. A lot of people over the years wrote that script. I think the problem with that script is it truly was a studio project. It was probably bought as a spec script and developed, and anything unique about it was developed right out of it. Pulp Fiction, Stubble McShave says Pulp Fiction. Oh, that's right. The Stubble McShave says Pulp Fiction is a quarter century old today. Yes, that is true. Today is Pulp Fiction's birthday, if you can believe it. Crazy. It is Pulp Fiction's 25th birthday today. Can you believe it's a quarter century old? And that wasn't even Quentin Tarantino's first movie. Reservoir Dogs was. Amazing. Critical Equation. Zoe is good, but Vanessa Hudgens matched the comics look 100%. You know what, though? I think Zoe's got more of an edge than Vanessa Hudgens. And I saw Spring Breakers. But yeah, I'm glad you like her, but I think yes, Vanessa's good. But Benioff and Weiss, everyone is going to bag on Benioff and Weiss forever. But David Benioff wrote The 25th Hour, which I like, the Spike Lee film, and I think it's based on his novel. And remember, they did give us 7 years of pretty great Game of Thrones. They just didn't stick the landing at all, which was sort of sad, really. When you think about it, totally sad. Mukbang Review says the Succession on HBO, the Succession finale was epic. Just to add to your plate, can't believe you don't watch it. You know what? Succession is something I've always wanted to watch. I love all the actors in it, and I haven't gotten around to watching it. I'll probably watch it. I don't currently have HBO. I'm going to buy it when Watchmen debuts in a couple of days. It's just a couple of days. We're going to get Watchmen. And I'm going to watch Succession. I can't wait. And I there was some spoilers which I didn't read, but I'm really looking forward to Succession. It's right up my alley. Alexander Wilson says the Redskins owner Dan Snyder was an EP on Valkyrie. He may be the most hated man in Washington. Everything he touches goes or does bad. You know what, though? I liked Valkyrie. I thought Valkyrie turned out great. I mean, it was interesting. It was going to be made. Chris McQuarrie and Brian were going to do that. They were reteaming the first time since, well, Chris McQuarrie did do some uncredited rewrites on X-Men, but they were reteaming for the first time on another thriller since Usual Suspects. And Brian wanted to make that for a long time. And I think, you know what, they were going to do it cheap. Thomas Krenchman, I think, was going to originally play von Stauffenberg, and then Tom Cruise wanted to do it, and then it became a much bigger movie. But I like that. Critical Equation says DC female casting seems fire versus the MCU's ice. Sex sells. It does. I mean, look, though, I don't think you can have a problem with anybody they've cast in the MCU as far as women go. I mean, come on. Kate Blanchett is Hela, Valkyrie, Black Widow, even Captain Marvel. I think Brie Larson's a little hottie. So I think the difference is these characters. I mean, Catwoman, especially Selena Kyle, is a slinky sexual character. I don't necessarily think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been laying into the sex appeal or leaning into the sex appeal of their characters. It's definitely there, but it's not like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a smoldering bed of sexuality ready to explode in erotic energy at any moment. We haven't seen much of that in the MCU, and I don't necessarily think it belongs there. And it doesn't bother me, but I think you are correct. I mean, there's definitely a smoldering sexuality there, but that's okay. I think that's okay. This one comes from Noel McCord. Noel McCord writes in, "Hey, Rob, I've been a Star Trek fan since the original show hit Irish TV back in the 70s in syndication. Next Generation was great. Voyager had its moments. I really didn't care for Enterprise, and Discovery is not so good. To me, the best Star Trek show is Deep Space Nine. Some great writing and characters on the show. I've recently rewatched it again on Netflix. Fantastic show. Anyway, I was just thinking about how wrong the new movies got it. I really disliked the direction they took. Now, I didn't mind the first one. It wasn't the Star Trek I remember, but it entertained me. Into Darkness was awful, and Beyond was terrible. I really think they missed a great opportunity to play with a great character from the original series. My problem with Into Darkness is the whole Khan plotline has been done again. Why rehash a classic? I seriously nearly walked out of the theater when the new Spock shouted, Khan! The movie was just awful. To flip the Spock death scene was cringeworthy to me. In this new Kelvin timeline, Kirk and Spock barely know each other, and they pull that on us. The original Spock death scene felt earned. 3 seasons on TV, an animated show, a big screen outing, and then a return to the classic episode in Space Seed, not to mention better acting and writing. This new death scene with Kirk felt rushed, and it had no emotion to it whatsoever. I hated it so much. Casting Benedict Cumberbatch was a mistake. Don't get me wrong, he's a fine actor, but he's no Khan. If they really wanted to rehash a character, I think they should have gone back to the original series again and play with the character Gary Mitchell from the episode Where No Man Has Gone Before. By the way, I love that idea. Now, there's a character Cumberbatch would have been perfect for. It would have been so much more interesting to see him do that role. A quick flashback at the start of the movie to show him and Kirk at the academy and then heading out on a 5-year mission, and suddenly shit hits the fan and he becomes this all-powerful being. I don't know if it would have been strong enough to carry a whole movie, but it certainly would have been better than that lame Khan rehash. Love the show, Rob, and I look forward to Tarantino's take on Trek. Noel. Well, Noel, you know what? I mean, we've talked about this so much on this show, but I think, look, I hate Into Darkness. I hate it for a lot of reasons. It's a movie that asks you to believe somebody is clandestinely building a super secret starship, but they have a model of that super secret starship on a table in their office at Starfleet headquarters. Hey, what's that ship over there? The movie's so brain dead, and it speaks to the fact that I don't think J.J. Abrams thinks about this stuff. But I'll tell you what I really hated about it. So the character of Khan was a genetically engineered Superman with superior intellect and superior strength, who, remember, ruled a quarter of the world's population. He was a ruler that was very successful at what he did. Even in Space Seed, we learned that he was a pretty benevolent ruler. He wasn't killing his own population. He wasn't torturing people. And Spock was like, yeah, but they were all united under one whip. I love how he said whip. But that was interesting. You would never know anything about the history of Khan Noonien Singh, much less understand why his name was Khan Noonien Singh because he's being played by Benedict Cumberbatch. You'd never know any of that in the movie. And the whole thing that made Khan interesting was that he was this great leader. He was this great leader of men and women and countries, and he was genetically superior. That's why he was an interesting character. It's as if, and this was a Kurtzman and Orsi script too, and Bob Orsi always talked about it. I loved Star Trek. There was none of that in the movie. And wouldn't it have been interesting? Okay, Khan obviously was rescued by a different starship. They found the Botany Bay drifting in space. They had, what if it all went down? What if it was different? Like it took Khan as a character and it made him uninteresting. Everything that made him interesting was not even touched upon or utilized in the story. And I just thought it was a very unimaginative way to go about dealing with that character. And I think all three of the Star Trek movies that are not good. Not good. Alexander Wilson says men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Jay-Z. All the Joker internet outrage was really nothing because it didn't affect the box office, i.e. Captain Marvel. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't understand why. I guess I'm perplexed. I mean, everyone still bitches and moans and complains about social justice and all that. But what's so funny to me is that's what superheroes and science fiction has always been about. It's about inclusion and diversity and because it usually takes place in the future. I mean, one of my favorite science fiction shows of all time, made between 1969 and 1971, was Jerry Anderson's UFO. And for the time, that also had a very diverse cast. So did Space 1999. I mean, yeah, it was more heavily there was a lot of white people on the show, sure, because you're in England, but there was a lot of diversity as well, and nobody really called much attention to it. It was just there because in the future that was the way it was going to be. So you're right. But I just, all the outrage. I mean, all the people that hate Brie Larson. What I don't like is again, people get caught up in the elements of what people say rather than in the essence of what people say. And I know, look, I'm in the genre community. I know that predominantly my own audience here, all of you beautiful imagination connoisseurs, my audience is, I'm lucky if I get 3% female viewers. We like things. People like things in different ways. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I do like men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Jay-Z, 100%. I love Jay-Z. The man was a poet and still is a poet, and he speaks the truth. Magic K says Zoe Kravitz reportedly being cast as Catwoman. I think that's great. We've been talking about that in the chat. The internet, I think that's what somebody meant by the internet's going crazy with Zoe Kravitz reportedly being cast as Catwoman. Hey, that's good casting to me. I mean, it's so funny. Everyone's going to get all mad about it or talk. Great. She was cast as Catwoman. Awesome. I mean, I don't know what incarnation are we getting? I loved Anne Hathaway's Catwoman. I actually thought, that all of the Catwomen that have everyone who's portrayed Catwomen in the past have all been good in their own unique ways. They were let down. They were absolutely let down. It was always the movie and the filmmakers that let him. Pitoff doing Catwoman. I mean, it was too bad. But, who knows? Maybe it'll be good. Hope springs eternal. I mean, it's good in my book until it's not. That's the way I look at it. A new Batman movie, bring it on. I hope it's great. Maybe it will be. Who knows? It could be great. Wouldn't that be great if we get a new great Batman movie? James Ito is here. James Ito says, hey, Robert, I have been thinking about the topic of death. Well, as Depeche Mode said, death is everywhere. There are flies on the windscreen. I've been thinking about the topic of death recently and wanted to address and ask you questions about death in general and the representation of death in cinema. Very few, if any, people on this earth knows what really happens after we die. I love it. Very few. I think nobody knows. Film and television have an endless amount of ideas and stories to represent this topic. Death and the afterlife can be a topic in horror, drama, fantasy, and even comedies. The first film I can think of where death or a version of the afterlife was a main plot point is Angels in the Outfield, when I was 7 years old. I love this film, and it's also my favorite baseball movie. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, a.k.a. Roger, can see literal angels appearing in Anaheim and assist the players to win games. It's pretty funny seeing Matthew McConaughey's arm crush through the barrier. This goes on for the whole season, and the angels only appear if Roger's there. The most real-life moment and grounded scene in this film is where Roger and Christopher Lloyd's angel character observe the Angels pitcher, Mel Clark, played by Tony Danza, before he goes up to pitch at the pennant. Lloyd tells Roger that he came down to check on Clark because his time is coming in 6 months. My heart sank and I started crying, knowing that one of my favorite characters was going to die. I rewatched this scene only a few hours ago, and what Christopher Lloyd says next that comforted me was, "He'll be taken care of." And at the end of the film shows Roger's prayer getting answered as he's adopted into a family. Commence crying. As a kid, I cried myself floods whenever I thought of my mom or myself dying, and I was a very healthy kid. Another film that brought up death as the main focus is Casper from 1995. One of my favorite scenes from that film is Casper talking to Kat about his childhood and remembering how he died from hypothermia. The big moment in this film for me is at the end when Kat's mother appears to Casper to grant him an hour of life for saving Kat's father, her husband. Later, she appears to her husband, Bill Pullman, to let him know that she's all right and not to worry about her and put the focus on Kat. This scene is what I think and hope conversations are really like whenever we pass on from this life. None of us can escape death, but we can control our views or preparation for it. I have no knowledge of anything after we die, but all I hope for is to be with my wife and kids forever. Those two films are only a handful of films that touch me about death and what happens after we die. So, Robert, what films do you think have a good representation of death or what you hope death and the afterlife is like? Your virtual movie friend, James. Okay, James, I'm gonna totally tell you what just jumped into my mind. The first thing that jumped into my mind is a pornographic movie from the 70s called The Devil and Miss Jones, starring Georgina Spelvin. I'll tell you why. Because at the opening of that movie, and it's a very famous pornographic movie, there is a woman who has killed herself in a bathtub. She's committed suicide. This is how a porno movie begins. And she basically winds up in I wouldn't say purgatory, but in a waiting room. Basically, she has to talk to an administrator. And the administrator says, "Look, you're going to hell. You killed yourself. You're going to hell." And she was a school teacher, apparently didn't live much life. And she said, "Well, what if I go back and live my life in total sin for like a month or something?" I don't know. I've only seen this movie once. I got in a lot of trouble. My dad came in, and me and my three of my friends were watching this. This was the very first pornographic movie I ever saw. I was blown away. I could not believe what I was seeing. Frankly, I was pretty disgusted, but it had a Twilight Zone spin. So she ends up doing all of these horrifically carnal, well, actually tremendously carnal things, but it really put the damper on my sexuality for a while because I could never compete with the gentleman that I saw packing some heavy artillery in this movie. I was like, oh my God. But anyway, so then at the end, this is the best Twilight Zone twist. This is an actual pornographic film. So she comes back after sating her former desires, and she now feels, or she satiated her desires, and she lived in sin, and now she has to go to hell. So she goes to hell at the end of the movie, and she gets locked in a cell she's become a complete sex maniac, and she's locked in a cell for all eternity with a guy who's like, "The spiders, they're all over me. They're all over me." And she's like, come touch me. Come touch me. And that's how eternity was for them. That was the first thing that popped in my mind. First of all, I got caught watching it. I got my VCR taken away by my dad. It was embarrassing all the way around. I couldn't believe what I saw because I'd never seen anything like this before. Now kids can go on the internet, but I'd never seen a porno movie. So it was like going from 0 to 60 instantaneously with gravity and what it would do to your body or something. This was horrific. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, but I did like the story, believe it or not. Some of my favorite movies about death and the afterlife. Defending Your Life, Albert Brooks movie, Defending Your Life. Heaven Can Wait, the original Heaven Can Wait. Modern movies that Meet Joe Black. But I think since you talked about angels, there's a lot of movies that deal with death and the afterlife. I like Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder is a really interesting movie about the afterlife. Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which was a Twilight Zone episode. But my favorite movie, since you brought up angels, it's one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. Now, a lot of people won't be able to watch it. They're not going to dig it. Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire from the late 80s. And to a certain extent, its sequel, Far Away, So Close. If you haven't seen Wings of Desire, they remade it. Oh my God, with Meg Ryan and Nicolas Cage's City of Angels, which to this day, I watched half of. I couldn't get through it. I was so, not that it was a bad movie. It was a wonderfully made film. I just couldn't, I'm like, oh. Anyway, Wings of Desire is basically a movie that's set in Berlin before the wall comes down. And it's about Demille and Cecile, these two angels. And you find out that the world is full of angels. And angels only see the world in black and white. They see the universe in black and white. And their job is basically to watch what humanity does and report back on it. Basically, I guess, report the idea. You never see this, but report to God, essentially. And the angels are enamored of humanity. And they basically walk around and they can hear your thoughts. So a lot of the time, like angels would congregate at the library. So you'd go into a library. There's a great scene in a library where there's like hundreds of angels and there's all these people studying or reading books. The angels are listening to what's going through people's minds. And they're basically just observing humanity. They can't interact with humanity and they're observing humanity. And the movie's, it's very philosophical and it's all about what is life all about. And it's just, I think it's a wonderful film, and I don't want to get into the plot of it, but there is a plot. And one of the angels decides to become mortal. An angel can decide to fall and become mortal and lead the rest of their life as a human mortal. And it's a wonderfully romantic film. It's not for everybody. It's really, it's very slow moving. I remember I wrote a paper for it when I was at USC, and it happened to be screening. I want to say it was screening in Santa Monica somewhere, and I went to see it, and half the audience walked out, which really bummed me out. But I did love the movie, and it's my favorite movie about death and the afterlife. Ghost. But I think we're fascinated by movies about death because it's going to come for all of us, and we don't know what's going to happen. And our Judeo-Christian religion, which is the foundation of Western civilization, really tells us, well, at least some elements of it tell us that there is an afterlife. And what does that mean? I mean, it's funny, like you say in your letter that you want to be with your wife and kids forever. I like that idea, but I would like to think that if there is an afterlife, if consciousness goes somewhere, that all of our earthly concerns, we evolve to go to some new plane of existence where our earthly concerns, and I would unfortunately count children and spouses amongst them, would be jettisoned and something new would take its place. But again, I don't know. But I love movies about death and the afterlife and, dealing with angels. Or one of the things that obsesses me too about horror in general is I would like to believe, like I've talked to my sister who's a born again Christian a lot about this idea that heaven and hell are places. Like there's real estate. And of course, The Sandman, the comic book, The Sandman, leans heavily into that. There are psychic bits of real estate. There are real places. Hell is a real place. You can go there, and I think that idea has always fascinated me, that both heaven and hell are these places. Defending Your Life. If you guys haven't seen Defending Your Life, Meryl Streep is in it. Albert Brooks directed it. He's also in it. I think it's a wonderful movie. I don't know how well it holds up. I actually worked on that movie, but I really like it. And basically, it's about a man who has to defend decisions. He has to watch. He has his own lawyer, and he has to watch moments in his life, replay and defend himself. It's pretty interesting. If you haven't seen Defending Your Life, watch it. Great letter, though. A great letter. Quite enjoyed that. But I think stories about death and angels and all that, they're irresistible. The Richard says, "What dreams may come." That's a great movie about the afterlife. I love that. Mukbang Reviews says, "Did you see Angel Heart with Zoe's mother, Lisa Bonet, Mickey Rourke, and De Niro? Thoughts?" Okay, Mukbang. I love Angel Heart. It's based on a novel by a guy named William Hortzberg called Fallen Angel. Alan Parker directed it. Alan Parker also directed Birdie. And I just realized one of my favorite movies of all time is Alan Parker's Birdie. And it never came out on Blu-ray, but it came out on Blu-ray. Indicator, the great Indicator, released it, and I think they sent it to me. That's what I have ordered. Blu-ray came out on Blu-ray. Blu-ray came out on Blu-ray. Birdie came out on Blu-ray. But I love Angel Heart. If you guys haven't seen Angel Heart, the less you know about it, the better. Lisa Bonet is in it, and there's some great stuff with her, if you know what I'm saying. Hubba hubba. And Mickey Rourke plays a detective looking for a jazz player named Johnny Favorite, and it's set in New York and New Orleans, and it's one of my favorite modern, I would call it a horror movie. It's definitely a horror film, and it's also a detective thriller. It's a pastiche, a genre pastiche. It is beautifully made. Oh my God. And I love the film a lot. And Robert De Niro plays a character in it that you need to meet. It's great. Love it. Alan Sachs says, "Do Canadians say about?" The chat wants to know. Yes, Canadians do not say about. They say about. This was about. Yeah, they do. I mean, they just have a different way. It's a regional dialect thing. They do. The chat can say, yes, I say Canadians say about. They do. They just say different things. Like people from Boston say ca. Get in the car, not car. But I like it. I find Canadians to be endearing. I love all Canadians. Pretty much. Magic K says, "Beyond that casting, we got the new Batman hookup with Aquaman's stepdaughter. Zoe Kravitz is Jason Momoa's stepdaughter." That is correct. That's true, because Jason Momoa is married to Lisa Bonet. So he can if they want to recreate those scenes in Angel Heart, they can. That wouldn't be a bad thing. I think that actually be pretty good, to be honest. Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's exciting. See what happens when I'm on online. This letter comes from Josephine DeMarco. Now, to my knowledge, I don't remember Josephine DeMarco ever writing a letter again, but I do like the fact that Josephine DeMarco has written me a letter. "Hello, Master of Fun and Wonder. I have an idea for a new format for the Oscars that could potentially get their ratings up. I doubt they will follow through on my idea, but this is just for laughs. How about the Oscar Olympics? The Oscars with sports. It will be a 3-night event where the people who worked on the 8 to 10 movies nominated for Best Picture will be divided into teams and participate in a series of activities, including dance, gymnastics, and relay races. Cheerleaders will dance wearing costumes worn in the movies. The gymnastics routine will be done to the scores of the movies. The relays will include games of cup stacking, potato sack racing, go-karting, laser tag, and obstacle course football, and best for last, tug of war. It's like Battle of the Network Stars. Obviously, 10 teams cannot versus each other in a tug of war at the same time. That being said, because only 2 teams at a time will versus each other, there will be 4 to 5 games of tug of war total. It will be a 3-night event. The first night will be a song night where all of the songs nominated for Best Original Song are performed. The second night will be the performances of the dance and gymnastics routines, followed by the first 4 of the 8 relays I listed. The second night will be the dance and gymnastics routine performed again, followed by the second 4 of the 8 relays I listed and the announcement of the winners. The winners of the sports will not determine the actual winners. The sports will just be spectacle. Essentially, people love movies and people love sports. Put them together and you get a massive piece of hybrid entertainment. Hearing you and John use sports analogies about movies inspired me to write this letter to you. I also love listening to the John Campea Show and the Burnettwork. You've inspired me to make my own YouTube channel for discussing movies called Eclectic Movie Reviews. Well, that's great. Thanks, and keep up the content of fun and wonder. Sincerely, Josephine Josie DeMarco. P.S. Do you own a copy of Watership Down? I love it. It's one of my favorites. Let me ask the chat. What is the over or under 60% that Robert Meyer Burnett owns the Criterion Blu-ray of Watership Down? It's over. It's 100%. I own Watership Down. I don't own the new Watership Down that was on Netflix, although I quite enjoyed it. But I really love the old Watership Down. So there you go. Well, Josephine, I want to thank you for this letter. This was very amusing. I also want to say congratulations on starting your own YouTube channel, Eclectic Reviews. I'll have to look out for it. You'll have to write a letter or come into the chat and send us a link when we can see your first review. I think that's the great thing about YouTube. Anybody can start their YouTube channel, as evidenced by this one. So, and that reminds me, if you like these chats, please hit like, please share, please subscribe, because as Gary from Nerdrotic will tell you, littler right? These smaller YouTube channels need all the help we can get for those analytics, those all-powerful analytics. So yes, but I do want to thank you for your letter. I always like getting letters from new people. Remember, if you want to send me letters, go to the Burnettwork.net website and you can get those letters to me, which is always exciting. Brian Eng sends a moral quandary. I like when he sends his moral quandaries. I have another one earlier that I was going to read, but since I just clicked on this, I'm going to read it. And because today is Columbus Day, happy Columbus Day. So should wokeness cancel Columbus Day? Here's my thoughts about Columbus Day. Columbus, the way we have been taught about Columbus and the way we have understood Columbus here in America is basically a lie. Now, so I don't think Columbus was necessarily the great man. He really wasn't. If you find out about who Columbus is, I don't think he's really worthy of celebration. You know, he was a guy that, sure, I'm not going to take away that he crossed the Atlantic and found a new world. It's great. But Columbus was kind of a douche, to be honest. And I think we might do well to remember what everything that happened in the wake. Now, I am not one of those people that is going to say, you know, the indigenous peoples of the Americas were doomed. It just was a matter of time, unfortunately. How do you fight a force that isn't only going to just bring you smallpox and horrible diseases you've never had to put up with, but they had weapons and things that you could not defend against? Unfortunately, the indigenous populations of the Americas were doomed. Now, that said, we should have, as a Judeo-Christian peoples, you know, the people that were coming over here, whether it was the Spaniards, we could have treated the indigenous people that were already here. We could have shown them, let's say some Christianity, which we really didn't do, even to this day. And it's unfortunate how Native American and indigenous populations were decimated by many people. What happened? Everybody that was living in the Americas and Central America basically got the raw end of the stick. Horrible atrocities committed against everybody, against proud, beautiful civilizations that had been here pretty much unchanged for hundreds of years. Now, they weren't perfect. Indigenous populations, indigenous tribes, they were not exactly paragons of all the virtue in the world, but there was nothing they could have done under the onslaught of the Europeans. However, do I think we should celebrate Columbus Day? Probably not. It's not the best holiday in the world. And I think, you know, it's only a matter of time before a conquering alien force arrives. And you know what? Our Native American brothers and sisters, the indigenous populations that are here, that are now, you know, making money on casinos, if they can eke out a meager living on the land we've bequeathed to them, that they are owed so much more than they will ever get in the history of America. They just won't. But you know what? When you want to go hide on an Indian reservation because aliens are destroying your cities, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't let you on. Let's just say that. It's really too bad. I mean, the inevitability of history, the inevitability of mankind being atrocious to our fellow mankind is it's the list is long and distinguished. And as I've said, go back far enough, everyone has been oppressed. But it is sad that so much culture. I mean, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and you can't grow up in the Pacific Northwest and not be aware of the indigenous cultures of Native Americans, and have it be a part of your life, because you hear all about it. And of course, I grew up going to reservations to buy fireworks because they were illegal any other way. But Christopher Columbus, if you look into his history, probably not worthy of study. And that's where I could think that's where I think that woke culture actually could do a good thing. I think we should reassess how we feel about Columbus as a nation, and perhaps not necessarily celebrate Columbus Day. Those are my thoughts about that. So, yeah, the Richard, by bringing up What Dreams May Come, I now want to see that. I want to see it again. The Richard says, I saw Angel Heart and Serpent in the Rainbow on video in the same weekend. That's a cool double bill. I like Serpent in the Rainbow. Willow Yang says, I've never heard anyone say a boot in Vancouver. Well, maybe you have to go further east to Toronto or something, or maybe in the mid Canadians, the mid provinces, Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I'm going to bring Robservations number 248 to a close. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. It's been a fun chat. If you want to send me letters, please do so at theburnettwork.net. You can also support the channel there. I want to say thanks for everybody who supports the channel here via Super Chats and joining up. Thank you for also sending the letters. I want to thank my ever-patient, ever-vigilant moderators, Detective Jim, Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Greg Smith, and of course, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, who is now fighting for his life as mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. The elections are rapidly approaching. I know Mike is big into campaigning. I know how much this means to him, or not, but he's been the mayor, and he set this up. So we miss him. We want him back here as a moderator, and he will be back soon. But again, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for being an imagination connoisseur. I'll be back on the John Campea Show tomorrow, and I will say to you, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I will say, have a better day.